Hey guys, how's it going? Kripparrian here. Today I have a very different and special video for you guys. It is about Overpower, the card game. This is going to be a sponsored video, but it is special because Overpower is actually my very first card game. I played it around the time it came out in 1995. It has been quite some time. Well, why are we doing a video about it now? Well, Overpower is back. It is returning. It's having a Kickstarter. Now, normally I don't really, promote Kickstarter projects because, they're often too early, but this is not. We have product in hand, and we will be unboxing it in the second part of the video. And on their Kickstarter, which is running from October 15th to November 13th, you can participate and effectively pre-order some of their products, so some of the new sets. Now, Overpower is a card game that is very interesting. It is perhaps one of the remaining very unique card games. It's one of the most fun card games, and it was in an era where it was actually one of the first actual card games that you played. Before the 90s, people had just trading cards, not trading card games. So it's very early. It's very cool. I'll show you some of the new products, and I will show you roughly how to play to give you some of an idea. If you guys do want to learn more about the project or perhaps participate in it, I will have a link below to their Kickstarter page. Now, before I go into showing you guys some of the new cards, I want to give you guys a little bit context here. So I didn't just play Overpower for a small amount of time in my childhood years. No, that was not the case. I played a lot of Overpower. If you're wondering why the camera is more zoomed out than normal, it's because it has to be, because I have a lot to show you guys. So this is one of my card boxes. So this one is full Overpower. I know it looks like they have different cards here, but that's because these square bordered cards are actually mission cards. So there's different kinds of cards in Overpower, and they're played a bit differently. And these are in they were once in alphabetical order, but yes, it is really cool stuff. I have tons of the original Overpower. I got lots of mission controls, and I actually also have a sealed box of mission control booster packs from back in the day. So I have that box, and I have this box as well, which you can see here. So these are event cards and a few special cards there. So that is box number 2. And wait, it goes on. We have box number 3. And again, I have a few more than these, but these are the primary stuff here. Just another Overpower box here. More Overpower special cards. I kind of had these with their hero cards. You can see there, that's Morbius. But I will have some close-ups, and I will teach you guys the game here in the next segment. So here we are. This is the product that they sent me to highlight for this video. So they do have some product ready. They also have on their Kickstarter additional play-ready starter decks. They have at least a couple more that I saw, and they also have booster packs, and of course with that comes booster boxes. You can get all decked in the new Overpower if you wish. And again, that is on their Kickstarter page. So we will be opening these, but before we open these and look at the new Overpower, the Overpower that has returned in 2024, I want to just put them aside and show you guys some of the old cards of my collection. Now, some of these cards, I think Gambit's from this Gambit anyway, is from the original set. So these are some cards from 1995 and a little bit later. This in Overpower is called a hero card. And you play in a deck of 4 of them. You use 3 of them kind of like in your starting lineup, and you use 1 in reserve. And generally in Overpower, you do combat primarily with the ones in your front line. And if one of them is knocked out, you can replace it with the reserve like that. So how are they knocked out? What are these values here? This is where it gets really interesting. So you can see that, wait a second, Quicksilver has 6
energy, 6 fighting, 4 strength. Dr. Doom has 7 energy, 6 fighting, and 6 strength. Why would I use Quicksilver? That doesn't make any sense, right? Well, while it's true that the base attributes of the Dr. Doom hero card are greater than the Quicksilver one in this case, the rules for Overpower have a limited number of total points for your 4 heroes. Now, what that means is that you can absolutely run some really powerful hero cards. In fact, you can make them the highlight of your deck. But if you run ones that have far above average stats, you effectively have to compensate that with running weaker ones. And in Overpower, you generally use some cards, and we'll go over them as we unbox the new set, to basically use the energy value and attack with it, or boost it and attack with it, or defend with it, or boost it and defend with it. That's generally how it works. And if you land a hit, it can add to the total amount of damage, and when one of the hero cards has 20 damage to it, it is knocked out. Basically, it's out of play. You can also knock out a hero with a Spectrum KO, and that means doing a hit with each of the 3 fighting types. Now, some of these are the original sets, but they expanded on them. So you see a Gambit hero card, it has an intellect stat. Now, the interesting thing about Overpower is they've always made it so you could play with the old cards along with the new cards. And I expect this trend to largely remain the same. So how do you play with a 4 card along with the ancient 3 cards? The way that it works is, depending on how many attributes you have, the point total for your heroes changes. And while Gambit cannot interact with his intellect going against one of the cards without intellect, he can interact with the other 3 attributes. And it is really interesting because the Spectrum KO only requires 3 damage types to go through. So you'd have to hit Gambit on a classic hero card on all 3, but with the intellect stat, 3 out of the 4 will do. Now, while some hero cards just have higher attributes than others, well, it's not all about attributes. One of the primary type of cards is the special card. And you can see the special card here. This is a 1 per deck. You can only have 1 of those. And this says Gambit. So this means that Gambit is the only hero that can play this card. So some of these special cards have incredibly powerful effects, including this one in particular, actually. So if you want this effect to be part of your team, well, you'd effectively have to find a way to include Gambit in your team. And strategies and synergies between teams usually have shared strengths and some compensation for the weaknesses. So if we look at these heroes here, well, Morph doesn't really match up the other 3. The other 3 have fairly high attributes in energy, fairly high in fighting. Well, Morph is mostly just high in fighting, so it's not exactly a good fit, but you can still make a deck work. There's a lot that goes into deck building, and that's why it's such a wonderful game, because, well, it's not just about who has the highest stats, it's the strategy, it's everything. And it allows you to use even cards that otherwise don't look very good at all. It might be the case that you can use some of their particular special cards, or it might be that you want to run a few other heroes that are just insanely powerful, and you need to make up that difference somewhere. Now, you might be looking at these, and these are all Marvel cards, and that's true, but Overpower has not always been about Marvel. It started with Marvel, it went into DC, it went into Image, and went into lots of other stuff, and the brand new Overpower here, the play-ready starter decks of the modern age, they have everything. Everything is coming to Overpower. So let's quickly take a look at some of the product here so you can get an idea about what you may expect if you choose to order some, or at least to pique your interests. So we can see here, this is Zeus. So Zeus has incredibly high attributes. The highest attribute, I believe, is still an 8, if I'm not mistaken. Perhaps they increase it, but I don't believe they have. So Zeus has the highest possible base energy, and that allows him to play cards with an energy requirement of 8, which again is the maximum. Now that can be increased, and we'll go over that in a second. He has a relatively low combat score. A 6 is actually still a very high attribute for brute force, and int is pretty good. He's not going to get chipped away too easily with int if the opponent is trying to Spectrum KO him. And Zeus also has an ability. Zeus may have one duplicate, Thunderbolt Special. Zeus may not play energy teamwork cards. So Thunderbolt is one of his special cards, and we'll see it here in a moment. But normally what makes Overpower very interesting, where you can't just stack one thing constantly, is because when a round of combat starts, you draw 8 cards and you have to discard all duplicates. So as powerful as a card might be, you really have an incentive to run as few of them as possible, which is another thing that keeps the game fresh and different every single time you play. So now that we have Zeus there, let's see what comes with the package. Let's see what comes with Zeus in this deck here. So we have Hera. For the remainder of the game, all numerical attacks made against Zeus are shifted to Hera. And she is discarded after taking 10 damage. So it's kind of like a bubble against hits. It's very, very cool. A Jealous God. Choose a power grid target character higher than Zeus. Target character is -2 to all attacks of that power grid for the remainder of the game. You can nerf their big guy. This is Thunderbolt, and special cards, they don't have a requirement other than having the hero stated on the card alive to use the card itself. So it's not like some of the other cards that do have a requirement, which we'll see here in a moment. But this is a level 9 energy attack. So this is extremely high because even heroes that the opponent may have that are maxed out in energy will need an extra way to actually defend against this attack. So this might not look like a particularly strong card, but I assure you that it is. And Zeus's special on the hero card allows him to run 2 of these. So very, very cool. And target character may not attack for the remainder of the battle, or, so it's like a double-headed card, opponent must discard all placed ally cards and is -3 to venture total for this battle. And this is a 1 per deck. Some cards have a 1 per deck limitation, and perhaps it is a good time to talk about what a venture total is. So as you do damage, if you do more damage through hits than your opponent, you have essentially won that round of battle. And you can basically, after the battle is set up, you can wager a certain number of mission cards if you choose. If you win the venture, you basically win your missions. And if you win 7 mission cards, you win the game. Otherwise, you win the game by knocking out all of their heroes. Now, what's really interesting about the game is that these Zeus-specific cards are going to be some of the most powerful cards in your deck because, actually, you know, this is Zeus's starter deck, really. But the idea is that the opponent knows that as well. The opponent's going to try to attack Zeus because if they knock out Zeus, you can't play his strongest cards anymore. And you probably can't play a few of the others as well, as we will see. So that's how that works. So let's see what teammates does Zeus have in this deck. He has the Angry Mob from the Middle Ages. While the attributes are not particularly high, it is important to note that they are fairly synergistic with Zeus. So the energy value is high, the combat is relatively low, and the brute force is the same. While the intellect is lower, an intellect value of 1 is often going to be better than an intellect value of 2 or 3 because, well, you're probably going to get hit with intellect attacks anyway, and it actually lowers the total value, making it a lower impact in your maximum total for your hero selection. The Angry Mob also must have 25 hits to be cumulative KO'd instead of the normal 20. So this guy is an absolute tank. And the special cards basically go along with that as well. You can see some of the art there. Very cool stuff. We also have Wicked Witch of the West, which again has an energy value of 8, which is the maximum. Very high combat, the same int, but a lower brute force. So it is a bit of a weakness. It might be pretty difficult to keep your Wicked Witch of the West alive. However, once we actually see some of the special cards, the Wicked Witch is particularly good at avoiding attacks. Now, in Overpower, these are commonly called negates, and they are some of the strongest cards in the game. The fourth hero is Dejathoris, and Dejathoris again has very high energy, not so high brute force, but she has a pretty high combat value as well, which might allow you to open up into spectrum KOs against your opponents. Now, only one special card for Dejathoris is included in the starter deck, but this is standalone probably the best card in the deck, which is why she is in it. So, Protector of Barsoom, Dejathoris or teammate may avoid one attack. Opponent's turn immediately ends. This is an incredibly powerful card, and I wouldn't be surprised if Dejathoris is ran just for the sake of that one card in a lot of decks moving forward. So this is the mission objective. This is the Tarzan of the Apes. You have the 7 mission cards, so you can basically venture as many as you want for combat, and if you win 7, well, you have won the game with the secondary win condition. So these are kind of like the basic attack and defend cards, and these can only be used if you actually have the value. Now, some of these cards have very low values, admittedly, but a lot of the time you will see players trying to chip away at even some of the vulnerable stats. For example, Zeus has a pretty low combat score, but someone might have an even lower combat score. And if they have an even lower combat score, it might give you the opportunity to spectrum KO some of their heroes. And that's basically what those cards are for. On the high end, it's pretty clear that this deck is designed to hit the enemies with extremely high power energy hits. So you have the 6s on the energy, you have the 7s on the energy. So only Zeus and the Witch can play the 7s and the 8s, but those are the maximum value. And these are the universe cards. These have basically the properties that you can increase the value on the card for an attack and can be very powerful when used correctly. So that is the Zeus deck. Very, very cool. The art style is a little bit different from before, but it does look like the functionality is pretty similar, which is really great because that does mean that you should be able to use these cards along with your old Overpower cards. If you have some like me, I have about 10,000 Overpower cards from before, I was quite a collector. And that is very cool. It opens many more possibilities. Now, on part 2, we have the other play-ready starter deck that I was sent. This is the Horror Menagerie. Let's just quickly see what's in this one to get some idea. And again, this is just the first round product. They will have quite a few more. The star of the deck is Cthulhu. How about that? So very high energy, the highest possible brute force, and very high intelligence. You will rarely see cards with better stats than these because, as I mentioned, a combat score of 1 is often just as good as 2, sometimes just as good as 3. And an 8, 7, 6 is unbelievably high. So this is an extremely strong card, unless, of course, your opponent is running a combat-focused deck, in which case, yeah, Cthulhu might not be so good, but look at Cthulhu's ability. May play intelligence teamwork cards from reserve. So that means that he can be not in the front line and still activate some of his effects and power. Cthulhu generally has extremely powerful effects. Opponent's characters hits the KO are -5 for the remainder of the game, which is insane, and may be played from reserve. This would indicate that this deck is able to have multiple win conditions. Going from 20 to 15 is a pretty big deal, by the way. So that's a really huge card that Cthulhu has. And this card can be used in front of Cthulhu or a teammate. Teammates, Headless Horseman. And if we compare it to Cthulhu, it is very high energy, very high brute force. The combat's a little higher, the intelligence is a little bit lower. Headless Horseman has a mechanic where he gets additional power if he is targeting someone with the mark of the Headless Horseman, I believe. Yes. So for example, this card acts as a level 6 energy attack if the target has Mark of the Headless as a hit. Headless Horseman may make this attack after an opponent concedes the battle, and the opponent may defend. Basically, you play a round of Overpower with the 8 cards that you draw. It's kind of like a battle. And you basically stop making actions when you both agree that you're done. Basically, this is like, did I say I was done? Nah. And basically, you get another hit in. At that stage in the game, it might be that your opponent has no defenses remaining against it. So it's very interesting. And this allows you to pull the Mark of the Headless Horseman. Also on his team is the Mummy. And I have seen this card. The Mummy is actually one of the coolest cards that I've seen from the new set. The attributes aren't anything crazy here. It's a good brute force, it's a good energy, but it's a weak combat and it's a weak intelligence. But remember, if you have cards with insanely high stats like Cthulhu, you have to balance it out with characters that have lower than normal stats. So the Mummy actually has a fairly low total stat pool, but that's okay because the Mummy has incredible avoids. Teammate may avoid one attack with a power card, draw a card, discard if duplicate. Card draw is super premium, avoid attack is super premium, and this is not even a 1 per deck. So the Mummy, the idea is, well, you can probably tank some energy hits. Well, you can probably tank some brute force hits. But then you use some of these cards to avoid the hits that you can't tank very well, like against combat and intelligence. That's why avoid cards are typically considered some of the strongest in the game. Another, the Mummy may play offensively negate one of the opponent's special cards. The Mummy may discard one brute force power card, usable by the Mummy to defensively negate the effect of any one special card played by the opponent instead. So this card might seem worse than the other, but negates are kind of like, if you have 1 or 2, your opponent can expect it. If you have 3 or 4, your opponent's going to have a really hard time doing very much. The more you have, the better they are. And that kind of fits the theme of the Mummy. The Mummy is kind of themed around negate. Now, this negate can be used offensively or defensively, which is ridiculously overpowered, but effectively it costs you 2 cards to use, which puts it in balance, but gives the Mummy an extra tool in his kit that I would consider very powerful in general. Acts as a level 7 energy attack. If successful, remove a hit from the Mummy's hits to current battle or permanent record. So if you got hit, this is kind of like a recover. It's also notable that this is a level 7 energy, which is higher. Your opponent might anticipate a level 6 energy attack coming from the Mummy, but a level 7, not only is it harder to defend against, but it can be unexpected. We also have a 3 int. Acts as a level 3 intelligence attack, may be played after opponent has conceded the battle, opponent may defend. So again, one of those effects, very, very cool. Then we have Mina Harker. So Mina Harker is the character on the box of the Play Ready starter deck. Mina Harker has relatively low stats, but it is very interesting. This card in particular is one of the most interesting ones in the deck because the entire deck has high energy cards, high brute force, and combat intelligence. They're like okay. Cthulhu has a high int stat, but the others not so much. But none of the characters really have particularly good combat attributes. But look at this, a level 7 combat attack. So this allows you to, what otherwise might not be possible, do a spectrum KO. So to hit an enemy with 3 out of the 4 possible damage types. It's very difficult to utilize the combat damage type without this exact card. It's very important to have these kinds of cards because it might be quite difficult to deal with some threats otherwise. This is also a really interesting card. So the target character must reveal any cards in hand playable by target character, may be played from reserve. You basically get to see what's coming. In Overpower, this is extremely strong, but you'd have to basically see if it's worth losing a card because it doesn't do any damage or defend by itself. But sometimes information is precious. The mission is based around Cthulhu for this deck, which is very, very cool. These are the mission cards. Once again, you try to complete all 7 by wagering them in a battle. Now, the cards here are quite interesting, even though most heroes have higher than 5 energy. It looks like that is all you're getting from there. You have a 6, but you have some really, really huge brute force values. And the universe cards, and a few at the end. Overall, very cool stuff. The Zeus and the Cthulhu decks are amazing. And I am very happy to have them in my collection now. Hope you guys enjoyed the video, and we'll see you next time.